Thanks for joining today, everybody. My name is Brad Borgman. We're going to get to introductions in just a little while, but again, we really appreciate your time, studying some time away from a lot of work that's going on for most of us these days. And then also a special shout out and thanks to our international audience as well. I know we have a few on the call from various countries, so we very much appreciate that. We do have a good crowd for what we believe is an extremely important topic as well as we enter this kind of new phase or new chapter in our industry as it relates to environmental considerations. A few housekeeping items before we get started. It should be about 45 minutes to 60 minutes today. That's going to include some Q&A towards the end. And speaking of that Q&A, you should see a Q&A box towards the end or towards the bottom of your screen. Please populate any questions you have in that Q&A box. You may also notice a chat function that's going to be disabled. So make sure you throw your questions in the Q&A box, and Sarah will help get to those towards the end as well. Also, as you can see, we're currently on video. Just to put a name to the face, we're going to turn our videos off as we get to the main portion of the presentation, just to minimize any potential IT issues or distractions that could come up as a result. So today's webinar, Elevating Your Game by Creating Sustainable Synthetic Turf Systems, will be presented by myself and my colleague, Amy Grace Curtis. My name is Brad Borgman. I'm the Director of Sales with US Green Tech. I've been working in this very fast-paced and fun industry since 2009, I guess it was, and have been with this team for the last 6 years. As a landscape designer, I guess by trade, and overall environmental enthusiast, in my personal life, this topic really holds a lot of genuine interest for me, and it feels really good to be working for a company and alongside colleagues that feel the same as well. Amy, I'll turn it over to you if you want to introduce yourself.
Of course. Thanks, Brad. I'm Amy Grace Curtis. I'm the company's business development lead. I was fortunate enough to join our team last year, and I've got a diverse background in marketing, research, and sales for both domestic and international marketplaces. And I'm excited to help share some informative details on this important topic around sustainability today.
Thanks, Amy. It's been awesome having Amy on our team here the last 6 months, and look forward to ways that she can help support you too going forward. So we're going to go through the bullets, and this is our lineup for today. So we're going to tackle this notion of sustainability. You'll hear that word a lot, but we're going to start off with just trying to figure out what the definition of this is. And then we'll look at some industry progress, and within the turf industry, we'll kind of take a glance at the last, several decades and see what kind of progress we've made. And then, of course, we'll drill down into our two products, which are Safe Shell and EnviroFill, and some of the environmental or sustainability implications of each of those. And then we'll talk through some case studies too. So how is this affecting us in real life? And then, of course, as we mentioned earlier, we'll get to your questions towards the end. For those that might not be as familiar with us, we've been developing progressive infill products for over 10 years, really trying to help advance the industry forward in a responsible way as it relates to our environmental impact, along with the safety and performance of the services we help create each year. We're also an employee-owned company, which is really cool. We really feel that this mentality, along with our mission of moving people to better lives, helps foster a level of, overall thought partnership and genuine collaboration with all those we work with, which we take a great deal of pride in. Moving on to our overarching theme of today, which again is this notion of sustainability. We'll start off by unpacking this topic from, I guess, a macro point of view, and then really try to understand how we as individual companies can enable this through day-to-day practices. I think we would all agree that this is not necessarily a new concept to most, but I do think it's one that can draw some confusion or maybe even frustration at times when we try to apply this in the real world. So therefore, why not start with a fundamental definition of sustainability and try to get all of us on the same page there? As you can see, we've got 2 to 3 definitions on the screen. I think the one at the bottom was pulled from an article I found online titled "The Top 5 Definitions of Sustainability." So trying to align on a definition of this can be confusing as well, but I think another area that we would agree is that this concept of sustainability is of or pertaining to multiple aspects, including environment and circular economics. And the more you research a topic, the more interesting information, useful information that you can find. Information like, some cool circular graphs like you see on your screen there. These illustrations help us conceptualize what can be an overwhelming topic, and then perhaps helps us apply these principles to our businesses and hopefully educate our clients along the way. The one there on the left-hand side we'll revisit here in just a few slides. So as we try to bring this down from the 100,000 foot level, I'd be remiss, I guess, if I didn't share a few cool stats from a global perspective that emphasizes just how critical progress towards sustainability is, and for all industries as far as that goes. KPMG is one of the leading consulting firms who have been publishing extensive findings on this topic since 1993. As you read through some of these stats, it's obvious that this issue has become one of the most important of our time, with over 80% of the largest companies around the world reporting on their own sustainability practices. And if you look at the middle column there, North America has the highest regional sustainability reporting rate of 90%. So I think for me, one of the takeaways of this slide is not only the emphasis on sustainability measures, but if you want to improve on something, what do you have to do first? You've got to start measuring it and tracking it, so we know what progress we're making. This is where I think we've got to be better as a construction industry on the whole. You can see here that based on biodiversity loss, which is a huge impact from a sustainability point of view, the construction and building materials industries are the first ones listed as being high risk. So given that this is the sector we work in, we've really got to ask ourselves, how can we, and continue asking ourselves, how can we in the synthetic turf industry do our part to improve upon this? So what can we do? How do we start this? To me, it really all starts with a conversation really at all levels of the project. A conversation to determine how you will define sustainability and what that means for you and your clients. Conversation to establish meaningful goals or maybe cost expectations to execute in a more sustainable manner. To determine what products might be available to you that help you achieve your project goals. Last, what happens to all the stuff at the end of its useful life cycle? So we're going to drill into that concept later on too. But many of these bullets you see on the screen here go back to the first poll we had today. So lots of considerations, but definitely not limited to what you see on the screen. So let's switch gears slightly and see how this is impacting, again, the turf industry. Now, I think the everyday benefits of synthetic turf are really hard to argue, as you can see here. We all know that it increases play, exercise, and even social interaction, for those using these surfaces and the fields we create. It's a very low maintenance options for those involved, especially the field owners. There's little to no water consumption, so thinking through the environmental impact there. It's a clean and sanitary surface for the most part, with no potentially harmful pesticides and fertilizers. The increased field utilization impact and the economical impact that has for communities is huge, and something that we don't necessarily talk about in all these cases. But overall, I think people are really coming around to the fact that it enhances lifestyles and all different applications these days, including sport, playgrounds, even residential installations, dog parks, and many more. But we're also not blind to the fact, like many industries, we have some work to do. And I truly believe that if we can continue moving the needle on these bullets, this can be one of the most innovative and impactful industries in the world. It doesn't seem like it to maybe outsiders from time to time, but we have already made meaningful progress in all categories here on your screen through product innovation, which you'll hear a lot more about from Amy, to early infrastructure leaps that will eventually enable circularity throughout our entire supply chain. It's also important to keep in mind that this is still a relatively new industry at roughly 35 years young. Here's another illustration that shows some of the progress side by side. You know, just a short 20 years ago, we didn't even know what sustainability meant to us in this industry, but thanks to more global emphasis and scientific research like we saw earlier from KPMG, we now know how important this is for the current generation, but also future generations. This is why the priorities in the last 20 years, if you look to the right column, look so much different. You know, from bio-based polymers in use to the prevalence of ISO certifications at the manufacturing level, to even the very first full-fledged recycling centers now in use, thanks to our European partners. So we truly are on the path to a more sustainable approach. If you recall, this is one of the visuals that I showed you, mentioned that we were going to revisit, focusing really on many of the top influences on sustainable design. The one we're going to highlight for the majority of today's presentation is right there in the middle, healthy material selection. And more specifically, some of the ways and reasons why US Green Tech products can help meet this need. So for sake of time, I won't regale you with you know, what we would call the first two generations of synthetic turf systems, but rather focus on the here and now and how we can continue moving forward. On your screen, we're depicting the third generation, used more commonly today. The two major differences between this and second generation would be the integration of a shock attenuation pad, as well as a progressive performance-based infill. How do these enable a more sustainable approach, you may ask? Well, there's a few key areas. First, there's strong evidence that using a shock pad will extend the life of the field by as much as 20 to 30%. Many pads these days are also either fully recycled and or recyclable, but also can be and have been reused for a second field life cycle. We see warranties these days go up to 20 to 25 years. Secondly, you know, what closed loop impact can infill have? Are there any renewable products available in that category? How can they be recycled or reused? Well, again, options do exist for this as well, and I'm going to let Amy get to that further. Another validation for using this kind of system is the influence it can also have on the performance of the surface. This is a study published by Labosport, which is many of you have probably recognized, a very well-respected international testing agency. They looked at 5 safety and playability performance metrics, which you see towards the left-hand column, really to try to understand the influence that these individual system components have on the surface. And as you can see, the performance infill layer has more influence than any other component. So when it comes to designing a field, whether we're talking about player safety, playability, or sustainability, consider choosing the infill performance layer first and then designing the rest of the system around that for optimal results. And then finally, before handing this over to Amy, we also wanted to show this graphic, which is just a simple way of illustrating the fact that our products have a tremendous amount of credibility behind them. With over 300 fields in the ground, and most proud of the fact that we've not had one field failure from our infills. So now Amy will talk a little bit more about our product benefits and some of the sustainability implications of each. Amy, take it away.
Thanks, Brad. So the first product we will discuss is Safe Shell. Roughly 5 years ago, we wanted to source and design a natural product with both sustainability and performance in mind. Safe Shell is a blend of English and black walnut shells and is 100% natural, with no additives or chemicals whatsoever. Due to its density and weight, which is 2 to 3 times that of most other natural infills, its maintenance overhead is very minimal, reducing emissions, transportation costs, and overall cost of ownership. One other noteworthy benefit in SafeShell's bio-preferred credentials. SafeShell was the first USDA certified bio-based infill on the market with 100% bio-based content. Now, this benefit will continue to be elevated as the current presidential administration puts more legislation in place for the use of bio-preferred products. This graph shows the full life cycle of SafeShell from farm to field, beginning with the sustainable harvesting from walnut trees farmed and processed here in the US with zero chemical additives involved, through the field installation, use, and field replacement. And at the end of its useful life, which currently we estimate to be 10 to 12 years in a field application, it can then be repurposed into other landscaping projects as biodegradable product, such as in mulch beds or soil amendments. These next few slides reinforce the overall positive impact of SafeShell on both sustainable performance and economics. This system was developed to maximize the value chain without compromising quality. SafeShell is typically installed at a rate of 1.5 pounds per square foot and a 1.75 to 2-inch dual fiber turf system. When combined with a Schmidt's ProPlay pad, which includes 100% pre-industrial and post-industrial recycled content that can be reused for a second field life cycle, you've got one of the most environmentally friendly systems out there, with the added benefit of this being approximately 20% less cost than the average alternative infill and padded systems. Here's a case study in Brooklyn where SafeShell was used to extend the life of a field that saw their previous natural infill blow out and degrade each year. After the first 3 years and tens of thousands in additional top-off expenses, they ended up replacing it with SafeShell. They got another 4 years out of these fields without having to top off the SafeShell once. The turf was pretty beat up at that point, so the fields were then ultimately replaced completely. Now, here's another case study showing SafeShell impact on surface temperature. This park is in the city of Hallandale Beach, Florida, and was installed in 2019. The area had had significant rainfall the night before, and when taking these temperatures readings around noon the next day, it was 95 degrees. You can see the 98-degree reading, which is about the same as natural grass, was taken along the edge of the field, and at the hottest was 134 degrees in the middle of the field, where the water will typically drain off the fastest. Now, we would still like to eventually see the temps even lower than this, but on average, this is roughly 40% cooler than a crumb rubber infilled surface. So to wrap up the SafeShell highlights, this graph illustrates the FIFA performance characteristics of the system. But what I'd like to reinforce are the takeaways there in the blue header, which once again illustrates SafeShell's impact on sustainability. With over 10,000 users weekly and roughly 12 hours per day, there was less than 1% degradation of SafeShell over a 4-year period, with no top-offs required, saving transportation, which cuts down on our carbon footprint, costs, and overall maintenance emissions and cost of ownership. Finally, the average SafeShell field will be approximately 30 to 40% cooler than a traditional rubber infilled surface, getting this much closer to natural grass. Next up is EnviroFill. EnviroFill has been our flagship product for over 12 years. It's another example of how US Green Tech was thinking sustainability before it was even a buzzword, well, at least in our industry. EnviroFill has many redeeming qualities, making it a fantastic choice for modern day systems. It has a highly rounded quartz sand at its core that is coated to completely encapsulate any residual dust particles, which is why in California it's Prop 65 exempt and known as a non-hazardous, non-toxic product. Because it's been around for so long, EnviroFill is one of the most tested and proven products on the market. EnviroFill passes some of the most stringent environmental testing standards and is also designed to be reused for multiple field life cycles as well. We'll discuss a few of those case studies later. Oh, and it also has an industry-leading warranty of 16 years. Now, due to ongoing demand for this product, but also our desire to lower our own carbon footprint, we've gone from one production facility to 4, bringing it closer to the end customer, which will help limit transportation and emissions impact. Here's a snapshot of our recommended system for EnviroFill. As with Safe Shell, we do recommend a shock pad underneath, but what sometimes gets overlooked and underappreciated is the fact that this is a homogeneous infill system, meaning no other ballast layer or infill is needed at all. This makes sourcing, trucking, but also on-site installation logistics, time, and emissions kept to a minimum. EnviroFill is a workhorse of a product and one of, if not the most versatile infills on the market. Now, let's take a look at a few quick case studies for EnviroFill. So an agency with the size and scope of New York City Parks naturally must be one of the most scrutinizing when it comes to their material selection and sustainability standards. They've been a longtime customer of EnviroFill due to the benefits we've already discussed, but also because they have a fairly limited maintenance budget relative to the number of fields they own. This is why they love EnviroFill's durability and low maintenance expectations. Moving on to the Pacific Northwest, aside from cost, one of the key issues at Pierce County near Seattle was solving for sustainability and ultimately reusability. They looked at a traditional sand rubber system with no pad that was about $1 million, an EnviroFill system over a pad that was $1.3 million, and a cork sand field that was $1.4 million. After comparing all three, what they found was that an EnviroFill system would save them $425,000 over 3 life cycles of replacing these fields. There are 2 prices that you pay for a field: the upfront price you pay to install it, and then the price of ownership over the replacement cycles in the future. While EnviroFill may be a little more today, it is one of the most cost-effective, lowest maintenance, and most sustainable and environmentally friendly infills you can use. We encourage you to visit our website to watch the video of Benjamin Barrett, the project manager for these field replacements, discussing their decision-making process. In this next case study, we make a swing back to the East Coast, to North Carolina. Finley Fields at UNC Chapel Hill were installed in 2017. But the site resides in a floodplain, so extra care had to be taken when designing for this site, knowing that eventually it was likely to flood. Well, fast forward just a few months later, and Hurricane Florence walloped the East Coast. As you can see in these time-lapse images, major flooding occurred on and around these fields with about 3 feet of water. Due to the thoughtful planning, rigorous material selection, and excellent installation work, the water receded within 24 hours. The natural grass fields next door couldn't say the same, as it took nearly 3 days for those to be clear of major flooding. So here's the before and after. With nearly any other infill material, we would have seen piles of it everywhere around the field, in the parking lots, and unfortunately in the storm drains. Due to EnviroFill's very high bulk density or weight, there was minimal to no movement of EnviroFill within or off the field, helping to keep the surrounding natural environment clean, not to mention the cleanup much easier for those managing the property. So we've talked a lot about EnviroFill's reuse benefit, but this is beyond just a concept. It's a proven concept, several times over at this point, with more examples of this slated for 2022. Tatum High School in Texas was the first such case study, originally installed in 2005 and reused during the field replacements in 2013. Not only were they able to reclaim and reuse 90% of the infill, but the performance test results the second time around were as good as the first, proving that performance doesn't have to be sacrificed in our quest for sustainability. They also reduced the number of EnviroFill trucks going to and from the site by roughly 90%. Okay, now it's Brad's turn to help bring us home with one more important topic.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, I mean, as you've heard, we've talked about sustainability, in mostly a broad sense, because there are a lot of considerations and a lot of influences on sustainability. Zero waste is another, I guess, enabler to a more sustainable design approach. And to help introduce this, I'd like to kind of reframe the question of what can be done now while we wait for further technological advancements and other infrastructure to be put in place that makes all of this a little easier to accomplish. So as you can see, zero waste ties very closely, again, to our definitions of sustainability. It's a way to manage through material waste, but also forces us to think more proactively and also strategically about reducing our waste from the start. So I'm just going to read it. What is zero waste? The conservation of all resources by means of responsible production, consumption, reuse, and recovery of products, packaging, and materials without burning and with no discharges to land, water, or air that threaten the environment or human health. Now, I know that's a mouthful. There's a lot to unpack there, but we've got to be methodical about this and try to understand what can be done now to again put us on another or a better path. So the next chart shows a zero waste hierarchy, and a little hard to understand, so I'll help interpret it now. The least ideal behavior is at the bottom, with the most ideal from what we know now at the top. Sadly, I think our industry, like many others, is currently operating at the bottom of the list, with landfill disposal being the most common practice as it relates to field replacements and so on. Obviously not ideal, but this is because the current state and federal regulations, for the most part, allow for this behavior to exist. So like most examples, unless we're really forced to change through regulation perhaps, change is either extremely slow or frankly doesn't happen at all. But here's some good news. Many of the practices higher up this list can be achieved now, which we'll showcase in a few slides. Just another quick stat, or a few quick stats here. Waste reduction and end-of-life solutions can't come fast enough. I think most of us would agree to that. An estimated 1,000 fields are replaced each year, resulting in over 500 million pounds of waste stream annually. And this is just in the US alone. The next graph, though, as we kind of continue to look through the positivity lens, if you will, this is promoted by one of the largest global manufacturers of synthetic turf. Again, I think what this does is really show that there is a desire to improve our processes now, but this serves mostly as concept, even though some of the kind of the steps in this process are taking place now. So before we kind of close out this idea of zero waste with a case study, just ask ourselves a few questions here. Is it possible now? Yes, and to some degree it is. And again, we'll get to that on the next slide. Is it challenging? Of course, you know, the old adage is if there's anything worth doing, it's worth doing right, but it's also not maybe the easiest thing to do. Do some of the processes exist? Yes. Does the technology exist? Yes, I would say on a smaller scale, it does. Does the will to do it exist? Again, kind of going back to our poll at the very beginning relative to desire, I think that's probably the biggest question at this point. So again, I wanted to highlight one more project that proves zero waste, at least, is possible, provided that you start the conversation early, you know, you find the right partners to help along the way, You select the materials that give you the best possible chance of making this happen, and so on. This project is in Cincinnati, Ohio, and showcases a synthetic field replacement project with many of these goals in mind. So we're going to go through some of the high-level results on the next slide. Just to recap, it was a 10-year-old field. This project happened last summer. Some of you may have been following it online. The original infill spec was EnviroFill, knowing that they would eventually want to replace the field, and they knew that EnviroFill had reuse characteristics. The turf, the EnviroFill was installed over a rubber pad. So here's kind of what happened to several of the components. The EnviroFill was reclaimed and super sacked on site to be reused, and was reused in the new field. This was a case where I think we quoted earlier that on the Tatum High School field, approximately 90% of the EnviroFill was reused. That really depends on the project, the accessibility around the curbs, and how much infill you can actually reclaim. But in the three or four examples we have where EnviroFill has been reused, it's been anywhere between about 70 and 90%. So we're seeing a recovery rate, just call it an average of about 80% on the EnviroFill side of things. The turf was reclaimed, rolled up, and in this case, it went back to the manufacturer, which was Shaw. The used super sacks were sacked up and sent to Best Plus Lumber. And while on that topic, something that's not necessarily called out here, when it comes to choosing and finding materials that enable a more sustainable approach, Best Plus Lumber also produces recycled and recyclable header boards and nailer boards to use around the curbing of the field, which was done in this case on the new field replacement as well. Plastic turf wrap was collected and delivered to Cincinnati Reuse and Recycling Hub. Even the cardboard cores inside the turf rolls were collected and delivered to Cincinnati Paperboard, even down to the drink bottles. Sounds easy enough, right? But making sure that those small details were addressed as well. And the pallets were collected and sent to a construction yard for reuse. So a lot of local logistics going on, and that has a heavy emphasis on the success of this type of project as well. And then the last thing I'll mention is the fact that at the end of the day, during the replacement process, only 1/2 of a debris bin was used and ultimately sent to the landfill. You know, I mean, a typical field replacement will see roughly 12 full debris bins worth of, you know, trash essentially going to the landfill. So it wasn't an absolute zero waste project, but in our eyes, it's one heck of a start and proves that it is possible. Okay, so get some of your questions ready. If you haven't done so already, we're going to get to those very soon. But just to recap a few items and perhaps give you a few takeaways to reflect on first. First up, how can US Green Tech products positively impact your sustainability goals? Here are just a few. As a reminder, we use a 100% natural, completely renewable resource to produce Safe Shell, our infill product, without sacrificing long-term performance or durability at one of the lowest costs for this organic or natural infill category. We're also, as you saw earlier in Amy's slides with our production facilities, we continue to get closer to the end user. So producing more locally, reducing transportation and overall carbon footprint as a result. And we don't want to stop with just those 4 locations. And then finally, we've proven the concept of reclamation, reuse, and repurpose. Again, all benefits that the EnviroFill product has. And that proof of concept is taking place, and there are a few more projects slated for this year as well. And then just kind of high level relating to sustainability takeaways. I mean, we started today's presentation with the fact that, you know, sustainability really starts with the conversation. So I know many of you are doing this already, especially from the designer point of view. But you know, as we're going through our checklist and having our initial meetings with our field owners, let's start this conversation early, push it further up the checklist and make sure we get off on the right foot. What product options to attain sustainability goals are available to you? And then progress doesn't happen overnight. So we need to be a little patient with one another and really kind of learn about, again, what technology exists and how we can choose the right partners to methodically improve on what is. Okay, you'll find more technical information about our products and our partner portal at usgreentech.com. You'll just be asked for an email address, and then that'll send us a notification, and we'll get your access granted right away. And then, of course, Amy and I are always here to speak with you directly, provide project resources, specification assessments, lunch and learns, samples, and so on. So we're here to help provide whatever information is needed. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You see our emails there on your screen. And so before we get to the Q&A, let's just do one last poll. What information from today's presentation would you like to learn more detail on? Global sustainability standards, how our products can help achieve your project goals, zero waste project details. And again, like the EnviroFill reuse examples, there are a few additional zero waste projects happening this year as well. And then fourth, recycling and reuse capabilities in the synthetic turf industry. So obviously we may not have all the answers to this, but again, to be a resource and help us all along the way, we're happy to try to track those down. All right, Sarah, what are our results? We'll use some of this just with our follow-ups. So recycling and reuse capabilities in the synthetic turf industry. Yeah, it's a great one, not to overshadow zero waste project details or how our products can help. We'll jot this information down and make sure that, again, as a part of our follow-up, we'll look to address this to the extent possible. All right, we're going to flip our cameras back on and then get to some of the questions for those that submitted. So Sarah, do you mind helping us out with that?
Not at all, Brad. I guess we'll start with, we had a couple of questions about whether we'll be sharing this presentation. You will receive a copy after the session, so thank you so much for participating. Let's see, we'll take a look. So the first question we have is from Eric. Eric, thank you for sharing a question. What is SafeShell's compression properties and water retainage?
Great technical question there, Eric. The water retainage is approximately 20% of its weight. So 20 to 22%, I think our testing report shows 21% to be precise. So it will help cool the field. We've seen those results, and you heard from Amy, anywhere from a half a day to 24 hours later as a result of that characteristic. And then on the compression side of things, it's interesting you asked. We just had this test completed by a third party, and there was no measurable compression to SafeShell. So hopefully that helps answer your question, and happy to follow up with that testing data as well.
Thanks for taking care of that, Brad. Let's see, we have a couple more. One is in relation to Finley. For the field design in the floodplain, what did the cross-section of the field look like in respect to drainage?
So I'm assuming that is the drainage system involved. That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that, but that is something that I think we'll be able to track down. I do know the designer of that system, and if we don't have record of it, I'm happy to help find it.
Thank you, Brad. Let's see, we have another one, EnviroFill per square foot in an 80,000 square foot install.
Oh, is that a pricing question, Sarah?
Let's see, EnviroFill in a per square foot. Yes, I think it might be a pricing question. Eric, we have this logged. We can certainly get back to you offline if that would be helpful to clarify your question.
Yeah, that's probably the best thing to do, just because the logistics involved and everything else. I will say that, we normally see Envirofill installed, in anywhere between 6 and 9 pounds per square foot, and then Safe Shell is anywhere between 1.25 pounds to 1.5 pounds per square foot on average.
Thanks, Brad. Let's see, we have one or two more. Let's see, we talk about, here's the question. You mentioned Envirofill can save time over three cycles. Please review this again so that we can understand the cost savings to the client. So this might be a little bit more involved, but I think overall talking about how it can save cost, Envirofill over multiple life cycles.
Yeah, obviously, I guess where we would start and what we know now is that obviously you're reclaiming the majority of the materials. So there's not the new material expense. Obviously, you've got to reinstall the Envirofill, but there's offsetting measures that will be triggered by reclaiming the material to begin with. But yeah, if there's an analysis that we can conduct or help conduct as it relates to a specific project, we'd love to do that.
Thank you, Brad. We have a question around turf manufacturers willing to accept a recycle old turf, and if not, if there are other avenues for recycling the fibers.
That's a tough one for me to answer. Just from my exposure, I guess, to the industry and to turf manufacturers, I think the willingness is absolutely there, and that is evident by some of the infrastructure and some of the reclamation practices that are already taking place. We did show that one chart or graph that showed the process to recycling fibers. And that's something, the fibers themselves, that's something that's been taking place for quite a while now, several years. But when it comes to recycling the backing, breaking the components down and making sure that it's all being either reused or avoiding the landfill. I think that's where a little bit of work needs to do. Yeah, happy to follow up and maybe connect you with a manufacturer that can answer that question more thoroughly.
Thank you, Brad. Let's see, we just have two more and I think we should be able to cover them. It looks like we got clarification on the question around that we thought maybe was relating to pricing. It was actually relating to pounds per square foot. So in an 80,000 square foot field, amount of pounds for Envirofill needed.
Yeah, so 80,000, it really depends on the turf spec. So sorry to kind of skirt around the answer there, but Envirofill works really well in a turf pile, like dual fiber system. 1.5 inch pile up to 1 3/4 inch is kind of the sweet spot. And again, that's going to be 7 pounds per square foot, give or take. If you're closer to 1 3/4 inch, you're probably 8, depending on the blade reveal you're looking for. And then an 1.5 inch system would be closer to that, like 6.5 or so pounds per foot.
Thanks, Brad. And I think we have one more question and then I think we'll be able to wrap it up. The last question is around Envirofill's lifespan. So essentially, will Envirofill outlive turf fibers and backing?
Well, I know, there's a lot of advances and we've come a long way as it relates to all these components over the years, and turf is lasting longer. I think there's certain things you can do to complement one another, so to speak. We talked about pad helping the turf live a little bit longer. Envirofill's warranty is 16 years. Again, we have seen multiple life cycles of Envirofill where the turf has actually needed to be replaced. I think on average, we're still seeing most turf systems or fibers needing to be replaced in that 8 to 10 year mark. If it's a really well-maintained field, maybe 10 to 12, but that would be pushing it.
Well, thank you, Brad and Amy. I think that concludes the questions we have on this end.
Well, awesome. Some really great questions and obviously a little bit of work to do for us too. So we'll make sure to jot those down, follow up with some technical details as well, along with the recording. But thank you so much to everybody joining the call, and especially the level of participation that we saw. We really appreciate it. We don't take it for granted. And enjoy the rest of your week, everybody.